And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you this morning?
Very well, Brian. How about yourself?
Doing good, doing good, doing good. I was reflecting on a little bit of what we've talked about these last couple of weeks, and it's been very interesting conversations about muscle balance, just posterior chain, glutes, all that kind of stuff, especially when working with clients. So things are being that we talk about, I can put into practical application fairly quickly, which is always nice. It's always nice to be reminded of things and be able to say, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. So yeah, I was having an argument with a client who's like, the glutes. I'm like, okay, back. They're a part of the equation. They're a part. Right. So it's kind of cool going back in my brain and sort of thinking about these conversations really do have a practical application sometimes when we are working with clients, just on our day-to-day. So hopefully everyone out there who's listening is also having the same experience, that they're able to put some of our theory and theoretical talking into, some practical application. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was funny because I was looking, scrolling through my emails basically. And literally the day we recorded last time we recorded, a thing popped up, which is from a little organization that I follow, that was all about like push, pull, lift, glutes. Like, what are they all about? And I just looked through it. It's like, yeah, the glutes are a thing. But again, it was one version of it. And I really was very happy with how we kind of brought up the range of stuff for the glutes, that the glutes can be overused, they can be underused. Yep. They certainly are not the whole story. You've got to balance them with the erectors, with pelvic position, with the hamstrings, all those things. So I think that was a nice reminder of why we're doing this podcast, which is exactly kind of to take these things that are like one topic headlines, do this, right? And everything will be better. And just opening that conversation up. So it's not like this is the be all end all, just strengthen your glutes and life will be great. It's like, no, wait a minute. It's a little more subtle than that, or certainly can be if you want to pay attention.
Well, in today's society of social media, you have to grab people's attention so quickly in a post or this or that, and you can spark so much attention, especially those who will say something about, and they'll do that one line, and the line will be the glutes, are where it's at or whatever.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, kind of, well, sort of, they're part of the equation. And when we explain it, this gives us an opportunity to do a little long form explanation. And today we're going to dive into that a little bit more and talk about asymmetries in general. We brought that up in our last conversation when we were talking about the posterior chain. It was like, you know what? I think you're right. Asymmetries is something that we're always trying to correct, I think. And with corrective exercise coming out, 15 years ago now? It's been around for a little while. People have been talking about trying to correct asymmetries and whatnot. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to dive into that and go into it in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. Really appreciate it. So we have like, subscribe, repost, comment, share, all these things, all those little, catchphrase keywords and whatnot. So we really appreciate when you do that. You can get in touch with us through our Gmail account, movingconvos@gmail.com. Also through Instagram, you can DM us. We really appreciate hearing from everybody, and that's the easiest way to get in touch with us as well. So hit us up. Moving Convos is the handle on Instagram, and that's usually where we're the most active social media wise. And we're going to be traveling pretty soon. We're going to be heading to Southern California, and that's like a month from now. That's just a little over a month. Yeah.
And we will be at Blue Moon Pilates in Mission Viejo, California, September 13th and 14th. And it'll be Brian and I teaching together. So we're going to work on the low back for a whole day. And then we will work on the shoulder for half a day on Sunday and osteoporosis for half a day on Sunday. And again, you hear a lot from us, you hear a lot of us talking, but this will be, let's look, let's observe, let's do exercises, let's get practical with all the things that we do. So come on and join us. The links should be in the show notes right below us. Yep. So come on and join us.
We really appreciate that. Now that that's all aside, let's jump into asymmetries.
So part of the reason we wanted to do this is one of the very first lessons that I learned working at St. Francis as a baby Pilates teacher was I had a lot of clients who, let's say, had had a knee surgery or had a hip surgery or had a foot injury for a long period of time or something, just the things that happen to people. And one of the things I realized was, let's say they'd been casted or immobilized for a period of time, maybe a short period of time, maybe a long period of time. Then when they start to come back into our world, which was, okay, let's move you again, the weakness on that immobilized side was kind of profound. Like the loss of strength was always like, ooh, that's major. So we would work in the usual Pilates way on trying to get that a little bit stronger. And what I fairly quickly realized is that if I kept working bilaterally with both legs in a balanced way for those clients, I would not get the results I wanted. That essentially the dominant side would just stay the dominant, stronger side, and the other side would just go along for the ride. So I really realized very early on in my career that if I want to work on something, and these are dramatic asymmetries, this wasn't like subtle. This was like, this is strong and this is not. I would really have to work on that weak side by itself to try to get it up to snuff and give it extra repetitions, work on it more, emphasize it more, and even find ways in bilateral work to get it firing a little bit more. So that was my introduction to working intentionally with asymmetries to try to correct those imbalances. And I know, Brian's done that as well. So,
and what's interesting is in my practice, a lot of times when I teach is I say there are two different ways that you can sort of see the body. One is subtle, and that usually becomes something that you obtain over time when you're watching the body and you can see shifts, you can see subtle asymmetries. What we're talking about at the moment are the ones you can spot from across the street. They're the ones that are very apparent. They're the ones that are just boom, right there in front of your face. And we talked about this with the glutes. We have one glute that you can see some hypertrophy and the other one looks like a bag of water that's just hanging. Yeah.
Right.
When you have those asymmetries, you're going to work with them possibly a little differently than someone who has these small asymmetries that you want to begin correcting that are going to be more like fine tuning rather than massive, changes. So I always sort of divide those into the two. And I think a good place for us to start are going to be with the apparent ones where we can see that, where one side is firing and the other isn't, or someone who's been casted, or someone who's had a knee replacement on one side and hasn't used that leg properly in probably the last 10 years anyway, because they were avoiding pain. So those are the things that we're going to definitely see. And those are very apparent.
Yes. And I think that's good to make that distinction, because the other thing too that I want to bring up in terms of common asymmetries you see are asymmetries brought about from athletic activities or from like postural habits or from, professional habits, whatever somebody's doing. One of the classic examples for me is I've used these guys as examples before. I worked with a AAA ball player who was a pitcher. And I've also worked with an Olympic level shot putter, and both of them, right? Those are very, very one-sided activities. And I worked with both of these men probably 20 years after they had really ended their professional careers or their semi-professional careers. And man, they like the whole right side for both of them was inches larger in the calf, in the thigh, in the arms than the left side. Like it just was. And so in that case, that one-sided training early in life set up an asymmetry that basically followed them through the rest of their life. In both cases, they were mostly pretty comfortable. Like both of them still worked out and did their stuff and stayed pretty comfortable, but they would both have issues at periods of time with that less active side. Sometimes with a more active side, but often with just that less active side, like the hip would start to hurt, the back would start to hurt, the shoulder would start to hurt, like things would just get a little funky. And we would just work a little on that side. It's never going to come to balance, but you at least get it closer.
I worked for probably 6 months, maybe almost a year when I was as a baby personal trainer. I worked with a professional arm wrestler, and he was a left-handed arm wrestler. That was a specialty, left-handed. And it was really interesting to sort of look at what he was currently doing, because how he trained was, and I was basically fine tuning some of his stuff. I wasn't doing huge gross training with him, is he would train the left side of his body one day. Then the next day he would train the right side of his body. everything was unilateral. And he said, I need this left arm to be stronger. And it was significantly larger. I can't tell you, his
Yeah.
bicep,
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
tricep, his forearm, everything looked like a different person. If you had him, do a front double bicep where he's flexing both, there's a huge difference. And it
Right.
was really interesting sort of to see that and think, wow, he's really trained that. But again, he focused on, and he was probably in his mid 30s at the time, but he really focused on just left side today, right side tomorrow. And he did that for his
Nice.
entire body
Wow.
as much as he could.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which was really interesting because I was thinking, okay, he couldn't squat, but he could lunge, he could do step ups. I was trying to think how he divided his body straight through, and
Right.
looking at his workout was sort of, wow, you really do divide that. And in the off season, he would do a little bit of compound movement for both, but he really wanted to keep it as separate as possible because he knew
Uh,
he needed that one side to be stronger.
yeah.
And I told him, be aware when you retire, because obviously this isn't a professional,
Right.
he's a
Right. Right.
professional,
Right.
but he's not making us money on it.
Yeah.
So he's like, I know I'm going to have some asymmetries down the road or imbalances. I said, oh, you're going to have huge ones. And to be
Yeah.
go back and see him now, because he'd be probably in his 70s now. So it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to sort of see where those asymmetries are today. But you have that when you talk to someone who does sports on a regular basis. I work with a ton
Mhm.
of golfers. I've worked with professional level golfers.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
one directional swinging.
Yep.
And you can
Tennis
see it.
players. Yep.
Tennis players. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
These are not
to
symmetrical
work on that,
activities.
no, not at all. And most things aren't. We mouse with our dominant hand primarily.
Yep.
You see, I've I've got another story. I worked with someone who got their pro card, bodybuilder, and one side tricep was so much bigger than the other. I mean, it
Mhm.
was significant on stage. When she
Uh-huh.
wasn't contest prepped, it wasn't as apparent, but on stage. And one side of her trapezius, that same side, was really pretty big. I kept watching thinking, what is she doing differently? Because I was working with her on some fine tuning things, especially with her diet at the time. And I said, I'm just going to watch you work out. And I watched her and I said, okay, do you know that you always use the same side of the tricep, push down machine, and you're looking at yourself in the mirror, turning your head to the right the whole time? She didn't even
That's a
realize it.
classic. No, you don't. That's a
But
classic.
it's there, and she's looking at herself the whole time so she can get the proper pump or whatever. And I said, do you realize that? And she said, I never realized it. I like this side because I like the lighting in this. So there were reasons that she'd like that side. I said, I bet you never use the other side of the machine. She goes, never. I said, okay, that could explain part of that.
There we go. Let's think about that.
But we never would have seen that unless someone came at it from a different point of view, because it's something she never thought about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's wild. And
Yeah.
that's totally common, right? Most of us we live in the body that we live in,
Yep.
and we take it for granted mostly. And most clients are like, yeah, this is just what it does. Like, they don't notice that they only use the right side, or they always step up on a stair with their right leg, or whatever it is that they do. Most of us
Yep.
just are not that aware of that. You said something there too about working just the right side or just the left side, and I had two thoughts about that. One was, if you're doing anything, you are always to some extent using both sides. Just to be clear on that, you're
Absolutely.
not focusing
No
on one,
question.
but if you're using like one arm, you've got to stabilize with the left side of the body, whatever it is. So there's a little
Yep.
bit. So I was just thinking about that as you said that. And the other thing I was thinking was, how do we how do you or how do we plan a program when we're trying to get the two sides working together, or the two sides working differently? And that's kind of like the meat, I think, of a little bit what we're going to talk about here.
And for most of us, let's face it, your practice, my practice, most of the people out who are listening to this are going to be working with people trying to eliminate asymmetry and not necessarily to create greater asymmetry.
Right.
If you're working with a professional athlete who is that one-sided dominant, a professional football player, baseball player who needs to throw, and you don't necessarily want to mess them up while they're
No.
performing at the high
Right.
level. So that's a
Absolutely.
very different thing than working with someone who's retired from their sport, or someone who just, doesn't want to hurt. Someone who is noticing, wow, yeah, my back is bothering me. And it's like, well, Could that be because one glute is firing and the other isn't? Or one leg, the quad, is definitely an inch larger than the other side? Small things like that can make a difference in
Right.
feeling the pain everywhere else.
Exactly. So one of the thing I want to say, and I remember this is what I was thinking of when you were talking about the guy working one side and then the other side. And this is something I say all the time that I think is really useful when working on any kind of one-sided exercise, like if you're just doing the right side and the left side, is rather than, and this is something that every single person I know does, rather than thinking this is my good side and this is my bad side, why isn't my bad side like my good side? Like almost every person to a person,
Yep.
everybody addresses their body that way. It's like, oh, well, my right side's better, my left side's not as good. And one of the things that I really encourage, if you're doing one-sided work, unilateral work in any organization, anyway, is think about the two sides not as identical twins that should look and act alike, but as fraternal twins that have their own personalities.
I
So it's
love
a little
that.
bit of a silly way to talk about it, but I always say like this is Alice and this is Louise. And when I do, leg work on the right side with Alice, I can focus on this, this, and this because that's what my right side needs. When I go to my left side, which in my case is my weaker side, I have to focus on different things. And I find just thinking about the two sides as different, not better and worse, but just like different, and really addressing that less active side or whatever you're trying to do, that the side you're trying to work on, if that's the situation, as what does it need? Like just asking
Yep.
yourself, what does that side need that the other side has, or that side needs to develop for itself? And I find that mental change really helps me in working with myself and with clients.
There's no question. And I think there's something else that we need to sometimes establish with our clients is that there is no, I've never read in the contract of life that everything on one side needs to be the same as the other side, or that
No.
I should be able to do this. Yes, technically, everybody should be able to do what they want to. But because of whatever is going on in your body, there may be things that you can't do anymore.
Right.
And that's just life. So there's nothing in the contract that says your right side needs to be exactly the same as your left, and you should be able to do the same thing with your right as your left. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I never saw it in the contract. I don't know about you, but I've never seen that. The owner's manual didn't have that
Yeah.
on page 12 or something. I didn't see that.
Uh-uh. No, and I mean, to that point too, like, one of the things that I find personal trainers do and Pilates teachers both do for sure is that idea that we're often aiming for symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, that's one of the classic ways we look at the body is like, does the right side look like the left side? Is the right leg as strong as the left leg? That's a constant way that we think about things,
Mm-hmm.
and often are trying to bring those more into balance. And a lot of asymmetries, to Brian's point, are either athletically necessary, so we'll put that as its own category, or are maybe structurally necessary. Somebody's got a long
Mm-hmm.
leg, somebody has a different spinal structure, somebody's got scoliosis, somebody has differences in the two hips, whatever the situation is. So there are anatomical asymmetries that also, affect how somebody can or can't work. And
Sure.
a lot of times what I say when we're trying to just bring those asymmetries into a little more balance is we're just trying to keep things a little more balanced. That's exactly it. You may not get perfect parity. That's not always what you're aiming for, but just sometimes bringing that weaker leg up or that weaker arm into a little better balance with the other side, that oftentimes is what's necessary to increase comfort, increase functionality, decrease pain.
Yeah. And all it takes sometimes is getting it closer. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be 100%,
Yeah.
just
Just,
getting
just
closer.
sharing a little more of the load.
If you've ever worked with anyone who's had an ACL tear and had their leg in a brace for a long period of time and couldn't work it out and things like that, especially in their 30s or 40s, they can lose an inch and a half in diameter of the quad and the thigh. And
Yep.
that may never get to be the same as the other side. It may never get to be the same way again.
Yeah.
Uh,
It can stay that way forever.
Exactly. But that's okay because functionally you can get that strength back. You can get them closer, but they don't have to necessarily be even. And I think we
Yeah.
can change our mindset to being, let's just get them closer to shore one side up rather than to think it has to be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing I wanted to bring up here is sometimes, sometimes, and this is just a client I was working with recently, sometimes you'll find that there's one little part of the body that you haven't paid attention to that is causing a whole pattern through the rest of the body. So this is the example I'm going to use here. I had a client, very fit, does great, beautiful Pilates mover, and pretty proficient in everything that she's doing. But she's just started to do a lot of physical work. So she's basically like clearing out a wooded lot. So she's doing a lot of just really heavy duty manual labor, and was noticing a few things. Noticing like when she throws a giant log, she can throw in one direction, but not in the other, right? So I throw a lot better to one side. And most of us have that. You know, most of us are one side, like we can throw to one side, we can't throw to the other, or we could, rotate better to one side than the other. And we're playing with that. And we're looking at the spine and we're looking at the hips. And then we went down to her foot on that side and realized that she really had she's got limited dorsiflexion anyway, but she also had very limited toe flexion on that side. So she wasn't pushing off. Like if you're going to really rotate your whole body to one side, you're going to be pushing off of that foot.
Right.
Right. And she didn't have the push off because she really wasn't using her toes. So the push off was coming more from the torso, and the foot wasn't doing its job. And the other side it was, because I watched her do both. So that was just one of those moments of, oh, okay. Not where I was looking for the asymmetry way higher up. And, there's asymmetries there as well. But it was one of those moments of, oh, well, if we just get that foot a little stronger and participating for that push off, you're going to be able to have a little more range of motion, a little more rotation. We worked on it for just a session, and she was better able to rotate in that direction.
We see that with people with sprained ankles all the time, that they start
And
developing this limp because they're not pushing off with one side 5 years later. One side is definitely the stride is shorter than the other, and it goes back 5, 10, 20 years before.
And this is the ankle she had repeatedly sprained.
There you go.
And she had sprained it not too long before this on, working on this uneven ground. And I was like, oh, let's see what's happening with that foot. And yeah, it had just given up, like for that period of time, which, happens after an injury. A lot of times the body just goes like, okay, I'm going to not do anything for a little while.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we're thinking about asymmetries, especially the big ones, and maybe even the subtle ones as well, but for the more apparent ones, let's talk about some thoughts that we can use in our daily practice. Because for me, I like to take a look at not number of repetitions or weight. I'm not a huge fan of adjusting the weight differently and say, I need to do more weight on one side than the other. I prefer to adjust by sets and the amount of total work. So I'll do a 3-to-1 ratio oftentimes. If they're, I may do, we have a leg press that's similar to a reformer where you're lying down, which mimics the squat a little bit more. I can have them do both legs, for a set, and then I can do unilateral. And when I do unilateral, I may do 3 sets on one side, 1 set on the other. So the weaker side has an opportunity to get stronger. And I don't overload the other side. So I'm not going to say, well, you can do 100 pounds on this leg and only 80 pounds on that. I'll keep it at 80. I won't necessarily tax out that or max out that other side all the time, maybe once in a while. But I really want to try and bring the other one up to match it as much as we can. And I find I get good success with that. So I look at the total work volume rather than just, well, you got to do more, more weight on that side.
I do the same thing. I'll typically do more sets, 2 or 3 more sets on the weak side, on the less active side, than on the stronger side. The other thing too that I think about with that, and this is something that gets a little subtle, but something that I found is helpful, is sometimes when I'm not just working on strength, but I'm also working on like alignment, coordination, like movement through that limb. Let's say it's a single leg squat, and one leg is pretty good, straight and aligned and pretty strong. The other one is like the knee goes in or the ankle wobbles or something. So I'm working on both strength and coordination. If that's the situation, then I'm actually going to start on the stronger side. And if I'm doing, at least when we first start working on this process, find and feel the pattern of movement on that side. Then I'll do extra on the less active side.
Mm-hmm.
Once I've gotten the movement pattern more organized on the weaker side, then I will start with the weaker side and I'll go like weak, strong, weak, or I'll do, 6,
Yep.
3, 6 or something like that. So that's another thing to think about is sometimes I need to use the stronger side or the more optimum side, however you want to put that, to train the other side, to give the client a really strong feeling of what does this feel like, or what does this look like? I might even use a mirror or something so they can see it. And then let's try to get the other side working the same way, then build up its pattern in terms of repetitions.
I had a physical therapist who actually introduced that concept to me. She said if she has someone who comes in with a rotator cuff, she would
Mm,
do the stronger side first. And the client would be arguing, no, 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 it's this shoulder that hurts. It's this. I know. But by establishing neurologically, this is the pattern I'm looking for. And so the first session would primarily be just the side that already works and getting that to really establish that neurologically. So the next time they come in, they do both sides. The other side sort of understands, oh, here's what I should be doing, even though the
right.
weight's usually a lot less. And we were seeing remarkable, you know, results from that. And I thought, wow, I would never have thought of that myself. Just I would have thought,
Yeah,
why work the other side first? But it does
right.
make a difference.
Neurological patterning is profound, and there's a lot of cross activity that happens.
Lots.
There's, and again, I don't have this reference in front of me, but I remember reading a study at one point which talked about if somebody was in a cast, and this was like a cast that covered the elbow, was the situation, for I don't know 3 weeks or something like that, and one group they had two different groups. One group, the other side, really they just did their ordinary activities. They didn't do anything special, and the other group basically worked the non-casted side in terms of like bicep strength and pronation and supination and triceps, like really worked that arm more. When they took the
Mhm.
cast off on the people who had worked the other arm, they had way less muscle loss and were
Interesting.
able to recover much more quickly. So, when you work your right leg, your left leg's responding. And they also use this in
Mhm.
stroke rehab. They
Yes.
like, right, they'll use that kind of like the brain looking like it's moving the damaged side, and it'll actually start to learn how to do it because the other side knows how to do it.
Yeah.
So there's that neurological piece, which is critical, which is actually and really useful, kind of simple tool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's very important to not gloss over that. Not to forget that we need to do the other side for that patterning and for success. So again, when I'm doing my 3-to-1 ratio, a lot of times I will start with the stronger side or the more
Hmm.
dominant side. And part of the reason is neurological patterning, yes. Uh, but it's also sometimes just so the body gets comfortable with it. I find that if I put
Right.
someone in an uncomfortable position and they're already hesitant on that side, they're going to find as many compensations and patterns that I'm not looking for as
Right.
possible. But if they can do it
Exactly.
on the other side, they're sort of like, oh, I got this. Then I could say, do you remember how that felt? Do you remember how, and I will cue them in on push through here. Do you feel this? Do you feel that? So they can establish those connections. Then you switch to the non-dominant side or the weaker side. And by using those cues, they're like, oh yeah, I remember how that feels. And I'll see their form shape up relatively quickly.
Exactly.
Sometimes like snapping a finger, it's just boop. And it's like, there it
Yeah.
is. There it
Yep.
is.
They get it. One other thing that I like to work on. So there's just, how do you set up your sets? So asymmetrically doing that, working on getting the movement pattern established as well as you can first. And sometimes with some clients, I have to take the weight down on that
Oh
funky
yeah.
side to get the pattern to work. And then we slowly build that up and then, we work them more evenly. The other thing that I often work on is how do I, even in bilateral work, like footwork on the reformer is going to be my example, or feet in straps, how do I get more activation on that weaker side? And there's two primary ways. One is just cueing it. So
Mhm.
if somebody's doing, even a squat, I'll say, just think about your left leg. Like do the squat, but just think about just pay attention to the left foot, the left leg. And that
Yep.
actually will almost immediately shift more effort to that side. So that's a mental way to work on those imbalances.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'll do is I will do some, I'll basically increase the pressure on that side. So with footwork, I may put a little pad under that less active leg, because just that little extra, basically making the leg shorter, will make it work a little bit harder. Or
Mm-hmm.
with feet in straps, I'll shorten up that strap just a little bit.
Hmm.
And that'll also give people more sensation into that strap. Because a lot of times when they have both feet up in the straps and you ask them, like, what do you feel? It's, I just feel my right side. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the strap's on my left leg, but I'm not really pushing into it. And so I'll make that just a titch shorter until they feel like they can push evenly into both sides. Those are some just little proprioceptive things that sometimes help too to get that less active side going.
I like that. I like that. I hadn't thought about doing that part of it, especially when I'm doing bilateral work. What I'll often do is there's a couple of different things. I sometimes will use tools to make sure they're
Mm-hmm.
working evenly, like a little balance pad or a little balance teeter totter, basically. So on like a squat or a leg press or something like that, something light, and I'll put just barely off the ground on one side. So they're just deet, 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 and just have them feel what it feels like to push evenly. And I'll usually see their body sway and try and figure it out. You can see their brain trying to figure it out. And often by the fourth or fifth repetition, they're pretty straight and they're like, okay, I got this. But the other way is just putting their attention, like you said, into that side. And
Yeah.
I'll say, and I'll ask them, I love using percentages. So I'll say, okay, you've done 4 or 5 repetitions. If I said right now, what percentage? Do you feel 50-50 on each leg? Do you feel 60-40, 70-30? And almost to a person, they'll say, oh, yeah, I feel like 65-35 or 60-40.
Uh-huh.
And I'll say,
Yeah.
all right, can you make it 50-50? And oh, and it doesn't even dawn on them because no one's asked them that question. So by bringing
Right.
them that, putting it to the forefront, that attention to that question is like, oh, okay. And you can see everything begin to change in their whole body, whereas they may have been leaning to one side a little bit, or there may be a little rotated or something. By just that one question, that one cue, suddenly everything centers itself. And it's like, got it. And sometimes it's as simple as that. Just say 50-50. And then down the road, that could become a simple cue that I'll say, okay, 50-50 in the feet. Yep. Or,
Yeah.
cue through the big toe or the heel, wherever we need to push through. But by
Yeah.
saying that, you'll see them correct themselves. So that becomes an easy shortcut, shorthand sort of, so to speak, of a cue.
Yeah.
And it works real well.
Love it. Exactly. And that's just that mind body connection, just paying attention.
Yeah.
When we pay attention, things change. Like we pay attention, things get better.
Yep.
Yeah. And we
Yep.
can really use our mental faculties to make stuff happen.
And I find with the subtle
Yeah.
things, those are the things that seem to make the biggest difference, are bringing your attention to it. So if they just have
Yes.
subtle, small imbalances or asymmetries, I find that those work best rather than necessarily focusing on doing more sets, more reps, or anything like that on one side versus the other. Sometimes it's just the awareness, and that can begin to shore that up. So sometimes it's easier on those because you can just bring their awareness. So just a side note.
Love it. One other way that I'll sometimes see different kinds of asymmetries is not so much on the reformer, where like feet and straps on the reformer, where both straps are pretty much organized by the machine, but feet and straps on the tower or the trap table. And more than
Mm.
once, I've had a client just, put both feet in the straps and just have them relax. And both legs swing over to the right, right? Or one leg turns
Yep.
out, or one leg stays straight and one leg like swings out to the side. And you'll see the habit in the body. Right.
Yes.
And so often I've seen that. And then I'll do things like, okay, so I'll just hold a dowel and say, this is your center. Because right now they're both on the right side of that center line. And I'll say, so just, and you can kind of see that even from lying down, you kind of glance and see this little pole. Okay, now keep
Mhm.
your feet at the same distance from that pole when you go up and down. And it's like, oh my God, I'm working my abductors on one side, my adductors on the other side to try to keep that balanced. Or, oh, I've got to really reach that left hip down or whatever it is. So it gets into that, how they hold themselves, because that's just habit, right?
Same thing I find with rotation discs.
Yes.
You
Yep.
have them stand on that, and immediately I've literally had people, their whole body turn to the right, and they're like, "What's happening?" They have no idea how it's happening. Both feet are turning, their whole body starts turning. And they say, "What happened?" I was like, "Well, that just tells me that there's some asymmetry here and that your body is trying to constantly turn you to the side. And it may be 5 or 10 degrees, but they're looking at themselves in the mirror and their whole body starts turning. They're like, what happened?" And they all think it's a trick thing. They look down at the disc. They say, "Are these even? Are they the same?" Trust me, they're the same. Turn around, try the other side. And they'll say, "Oh my gosh." And just getting their feet to be even. You'll see that. I've had some people start sweating and start, breathing
Yeah. Let's
harder,
just get
just standing,
parallel.
just standing parallel.
Yeah.
And it's
With no
really
resistance
funny
discs.
with no resistance
Yeah.
discs. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That was great because the next thing I was thinking of is we talked a lot about the limbs, which are relatively straightforward. When we get into asymmetries in the center and rotational asymmetries, particularly, it just gets a lot more complicated. So I love the fact that you brought that up right then. I was just thinking of how to head down that path.
Yep.
And the other thing too that I'll find, like if I put a client's both feet on a rotator disc and we do kind of like the twist, just like really literally do the twist on it, they'll find like they just keep going to the same side and they can't actually go in the other direction. Yeah. And I mean, even if they're twisting, it's like they're going back and forth, but they just keep going to the left, or
Their
they just
body
keep going to
starts
the right.
turning one direction. They're like,
It
"I'm going
just
clockwise. Why am I going
Exactly. It
clockwise?"
just and if you say, "Hey, can you go back the other way?" They can't. They
Yeah.
literally can't. They just can't get things organized to even move things back the other way.
Yeah.
So those are really nice ways to just go, oh, okay, that's what's happening now.
Yeah. I forgot I've done that before. You start them doing that and then they start turning to the side and they're like, "Why am I turning to the left? Why am I turning to
Uh-huh.
the left?" You're like, "Well, obviously there's something missing going to the right. Let's have your attention be more on that side." And
Yep.
I got to tell you, it takes time. You'd think that this could
Yeah.
be erased quickly, but and they all say, "Well, why is that?" I say, "Well, what side of the sofa do you sit on? How long have you been sitting there?" "Oh, wow. I can't remember when I sat on the other side." I said, "Sit on the other side tonight and see
Mhm.
how awkward that feels." And they will. And they go, "Oh, wow. It feels so strange." At your desk, where is your monitor? Is it slightly to the left? Do you find yourself doing that?
Which arm are you
My son,
mousing on? Which arms do you
here,
stabilize on?
here in DC, I work with a lot of psychologists and
Yeah.
psychiatrists,
Yes.
and almost to a person, the women, especially because they cross one leg over the other, because just the way they sit, they cross one leg and they take their pad and pencil and they rotate and write on their leg. So they're creating this rotation. And usually by the time they get to me, they've got back pain, hip pain, something. And I'll say, if you've been doing that for the past 30 years of your career for 8 hours a day, you know, how many repetitions? Do not expect this to be erased overnight. These asymmetries, especially in the core, I find the limbs are a lot easier sometimes in the core.
Limbs are much easier. The core is
Yeah.
way more complicated.
The
Yeah.
core is way more complicated because, like you say, that rotation to one side becomes so natural. The other side feels so awkward and so discombobulated that what you'll see is they'll jerk to the other side. They're trying too hard.
And they're like,
It's like, exactly, exactly. And you got to remind them, slow and steady. This is not going to happen
Mhm.
overnight. You're in kindergarten. You're not going to graduate tomorrow. It's going to take time to make it to 12th grade. Give it some time.
It's also watching. I've got a bunch of little kids in my life at this point, and watching them grow up, like those asymmetries happen from the beginning.
Oh yeah.
Like I remember watching several of my grandnieces and nephews, not the little ones around, starting to crawl. And it's like they crawl on the right side and then they kind of pull and then they crawl on the right side. All that work on the right side is what pulls them. The left side just kind of stays there.
Yep.
Right. And or they start to move or to walk, and they're always walking like almost in a circle, or they're sort of always like they're always toddling to one direction. And you see those things happen from the beginning, from the moment that they really
Mhm.
start to develop their movement patterns. And fortunately for my children, I don't have any, because if I did, they would have too many experiments to even think about. because because like one of them, like one of the one who really was like, every time she would crawl, it was always like right side would reach and the left side would not reach as far at all. Like it was
Uh-huh.
always right side reach. And then even if she was reaching for a toy, the right side would reach over her body to the left side to grab something, rather than reaching with the left hand, which was closer.
Yep.
And it was one of those things where it's like, I know if she'd been my child, I would put everything on her left side. And I would encourage her to kind of reach with that left arm. And I would put things she wanted to the left. So she had to kind of like reach for that left side. Because again, just to remind, that's how deep a lot of these patterns are. They're not,
Yeah.
they're not even necessarily adult posture patterns. They're like, this is how our nervous system organized itself from the moment we started to move. So just to put a little more emphasis on that particular piece. And
Yeah.
that's why it's
Yeah.
so hard to reorganize that, because our entire system is based on that as its kind of neurological foundation.
Yeah. To erase some of that, some of those, what I call environmental things that we've placed upon ourselves that may or may not be neurologic, for my athletes, especially my younger ones, for golfers, swing the other direction.
Yeah.
Every third hole, swing the other way. And you can see they go, wow. I started learning this from back pain clients who still wanted to play golf. I just said, just unwind. Think about it unwinding. For my tennis players, try using the other hand. I said, just by yourself, don't do it during a match, but try and use the other
Yeah.
hand. So your body is now rotating slightly differently through the hips, through the feet. Everything's pushing off a little differently. So hit it against the wall, practice a little bit. You're not going to get as good as the other side. Don't even think about it, but just try and practice that. So by doing that, and for kids, I mean, when I've worked with youngsters, it's like, look, throw the ball with the other hand. I don't care how far you throw it. Just practice. Get a little bit ambidextrous. You're not going to get as good at it. No, but swing your bat the other direction. Something very small like that can begin to just wake up the other side. And as adults, I find by doing that, it's the same thing. Wake up the other side, get them to do the patterns that they're not as familiar with and that they're not as comfortable with, because we all tend to focus on the things that we are
Yeah.
comfortable with.
Yeah.
So, push them out of their comfort zone, do a few things, and I say, look silly. I don't care.
Yeah. And I take that even into like mouse with your left hand. Now,
Bingo.
obviously,
Yeah. I was
you're going to
thinking
be
I do that a lot.
less proficient, but I just move, when I, especially because I've been doing a lot of like mousing stuff lately, a little graphic stuff. It's like, okay, my whole right hand will get like, ugh! So just switch sides, and I'm not as proficient. It's annoying. It's slightly frustrating because I can't move as well, but it just takes the stress off that right side. And, or, with simple ergonomic things, make sure your monitor is in front of you. It's not to the
Right.
side. Make sure your keyboard isn't off to one side. And the other thing I do is when people often sit on one cheek,
Yes.
right? So, just those little things too. Those are a little more subtle, but they're also things that we do all day, all the time. And oftentimes that'll send up a pattern.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The mousing thing I learned when I was in college. A study came out that said you actually wake up other parts of your brain by just doing something simple like brushing your teeth with the other hand or mousing
Yeah.
with the other hand. So literally, I switch off. If I'm doing work, I'm almost as proficient. I'm about 90% as proficient with my left as my right because I do switch off often. I got in the habit
Nice.
when I was in college.
Nice. That's good.
So at university, just sort of, I started doing that. And for me, it became very habit forming, but I mentioned that to clients. Switch off on that. I love the sitting on which cheek because I've noticed that even with myself. And I'm like, oh yeah, I do have a tendency to lean on my right side more than my left. And could that be avoiding back pain that I've had years ago? Maybe. Maybe it's where I had my monitor years ago. Who knows the reason? But I do find
Yeah.
myself sort of slinking to that right. So it's like, okay, I need to center myself a little bit more. So these are things even for us to be aware of that we do,
Yeah.
you know?
On a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So coming back to rotation, just because rotational asymmetries are something I kind of love to spend time on.
Mhm.
One of the things that I think about with that, and this is again looking at how those asymmetries move through the body, is looking at like breaking, not really breaking down, but just observing all the different elements that are at play here. So one of them is hip mobility, right? A lot of
Mhm.
times clients have more external rotation on one side in their hips and less on the other side. So they can rotate away from that externally rotated side easier than they can on the other side
Mhm.
because they run into
Yep.
kind of limitations in terms of the hips. So sometimes you're looking at a mobility situation too. We've talked a lot about strength, but sometimes you also have to balance out some mobility, right?
Mhm.
That's oftentimes where sometimes where some of those asymmetries come from is, let's say, a gait asymmetry in terms of hip flexion and extension, right? You're walking and they don't have as
Yep.
much hip extension on one side, they're tighter in that hip flexor, and that will lead to asymmetries in their gait that then feed through everything else, right? So also looking at mobility limitations or mobility challenges on the two sides. That's
Mhm.
another place that I'll work a lot, hips particularly. But the other thing too is looking at the spine. And a lot of times this is more something where I think body work is really great. Myofascial release is really great. Trying to identify like where the spine isn't moving in rotation can sometimes
Yes.
be just an interesting thing to think. And sometimes you can see it on a client. Sometimes they can feel it. And I often try to give clients a lot of different rotational exercises where they can maybe feel, oh, I go to the right and it feels really easy. I go to the left and I feel jammed up. Okay, where do you feel jammed up? Well, I feel jammed up kind of in my mid thoracic, or I feel like
Mhm.
my lower abdomen doesn't like stretch as much, or my head doesn't go as far, or my scapula don't move as far. So all those different pieces, this is getting a little complicated, I know, but all those pieces will influence rotational balance. And so I can work on the head, I can work on the scapular mobility, I can work on the erector spinae, getting them balanced, I can work on the hips, and playing with all those things just to get things a little closer to symmetrical.
And for us, as you invented a term that I love, assessorcise, where we
Yes.
do exercises, but we're always doing assessments as we're having our clients exercise. Well, getting their feedback is very important. So if you're doing something with its rotation, like telescope arms or something like that, everybody has one side that is like, oh, yeah, I have no problem on this side. On the other side, oh, I'm only going about 3/4 of the way. By asking them, where are you feeling tight? Besides the shoulder, everybody sort of wants to say the shoulder. For fitness people, it's like book openers, lying on your side, opening up the chest. Uh, but when you're doing that, you can really say, okay, not your shoulder. Where do you feel it in your spine? Where do you feel a limitation, or in your chest or in your abdominals? And they'll usually say, oh, yeah. And they'll have a pinpointed area. Usually it is mid thoracic, often. And they'll
Yeah.
say, right. And usually when you see it, it's like, okay. And then we can watch them as they're doing a one arm row or a single arm press or something. You can watch that area and see, is it rotating one way, but not the other? And we can begin to just get them to think about that area as you're rowing, as you're pulling back. Just think about this. Go 1/4 of a degree, just a little bit. Just put that awareness into that area. And believe it or not, over time, that area begins to often move a little bit better. You don't have to put a ton of effort into that, just a little bit,
Mm-mm.
just a little
Yep.
awareness, and it can make a huge difference.
And that's also where a good massage therapist, a good manual therapist can also
Ooh,
make
yes.
a really big difference, because a lot of times it's just things get sticky in the like the iliopsoas area and the whole front of the hip that gets
Mhm.
sticky, and the spine, the erector spinae definitely gets sticky. There's a million layers of muscles in there, and sometimes they just like to glue together. And so that's also where a little myofascial release or manual therapy can also be a big help on just finding mobility in an area that's kind of stuck.
Something that I think that as fitness professionals, we tend to forget about, but may we need a little reminder, is that not everybody moves nearly as much as we do on a regular basis, and not everybody has a
True.
tendency to feel the need to move, put it that way. They're very happy sitting and not moving. Whereas
Yeah.
fitness professionals, we have an addiction that we need to continue to move. If we have to sit still, even in a lecture for 2 hours and not move, I mean, I'm vibrating by the time it's kind of like I've got to move something. But when you look at, a lot of people, they haven't moved for years.
No.
And they've created these asymmetries in their spine. So guess what? They're
Yeah.
going to be sticky. they're going to
Yeah.
need a little bit of lubrication. And sometimes it's going to need to be done myofascially. It's going to need to be done with a soft foam roller or a manual therapist or something,
Yeah.
or even gentle mobility exercises, getting them to swing their arms so they get a little bit of rotation in their torso,
Yeah.
to be able to
Exactly.
just
Moving their
reach out
scapula.
overhead, squeeze their
Yep.
scapula together, just
Yep.
a little bit of movement, and to remind them, hey, I want you to do that at your desk once a day. Do it during lunch, whatever. 10 reaches with each hand overhead. I want you just to pretend that you're, grabbing one thing forward and pulling back and just swinging your arms. Just anything to get them to move a little bit can make a huge difference down the road.
Absolutely. So we've talked from, like, we're kind of going from all ends of the spectrum here. I want to tell a little funny story. So Brian and I have both been a couple different times to these international fascia congresses,
I was just
right?
thinking about that.
Yeah, we're in one in Virginia, and I was in one in Vancouver, and it was hilarious. There was 800 people in the room. Many of them were either scientists or massage people or whatever. So there's 800 people in the room, and there's a small corner in the front left-hand part of the thing that was all Pilates people and yoga people, movement people. For whatever reason, we clumped together, and it was hilarious because the whole rest of the audience sat quietly and
Yep.
didn't move. Like the entire rest of the audience. So like 790 people weren't moving at all. And our corner, we're like hanging off the edge of our chair. We're stretching. It was hilarious.
Oh,
We all
not
bring
just
we bring
that.
our balls in, we bring our rollers in, we're on the floor. Like it was
On
just
the
funny.
floor.
It
It's
was
like, and I remember taking turns. Someone would be on the floor over here, someone would be there, and then they'd get up and someone else would sort of take their place. And you could see when you're off to the side that occasionally the people who are talking would glance over at us, but then be like, oh, well, because we're not distracting. We're trying not to distract, but it's just we need to just gotta move something.
no.
So it was, I remember that. That was funny.
Do you remember that? It was really funny. And it's one of those things where that's not a bad habit to get into.
Exactly.
Like I think about my brother, I think about myself, probably you, Brian, too. Like, you're taught in school to not move, right? To be respectful and to just sit there and sit quietly. I could never do that. And I'm like the least hyperactive of my family members. Brian knows several of them, well, a couple of them. So basically, like I would have to do something kinesthetic. And what I realized was like I would bring pens, colored pens in, and my notes would be all like there'd be drawings and it'd be like arrows and like it would all be colorful because that act of picking something up and moving something helped my brain to work.
Yep.
Like clearly, like all through acupuncture school, I had like, I did the same thing with pens. And then when I go to conferences, I would bring origami paper and I would fold origami cranes under the table, not to distract my neighbors, but like I had to do something with my hands kinesthetically for my brain to work. And that was just how I was built.
Yep. And
Yeah.
for us, just the act of moving, there have been studies about children putting balls in the class, gym
Yeah.
balls,
Yep.
for them to bounce on. Not everybody, but to have a couple in the back of the room and to let this children know that if you feel the need to move at your desk, go get a ball, bring it back to your thing and just bounce and do that for 10 minutes and make sure you share. And I've supplied, the school that my kids were at. I said, I have no problem. I'll buy them for my kids' room because I have a child who has ADHD, kind of off the charts. He sits there vibrating, but if he has something where he can do, and for him, those fidget tools are great. That he just needs that stimulation of something to do. But the
Yeah.
ball really just the bouncing, the act of doing that is great for the spine. First of all, it's tons of nutrients for the spine, but just that act of moving and shifting the hips and getting muscles working, their brain's more active.
Yeah,
Whereas
absolutely.
you ask them to sit there and don't move and just stay still, their brain shuts off.
Yep.
They need to have that motion. They need that. And with that, things are going into their brain at an easier pace and they're retaining the knowledge. So yeah, I think it's very important for certain people to have that.
Yeah. So that was our funny way of bringing us
Yeah, that's
back
funny
to,
story. Yeah.
asymmetries. But just again, to Brian's point, it's like asymmetries are caused by our habitual posture and our habitual habit. And whatever you do all the time, like I call it building your fascial suit. Whatever you do builds your fascial suit. It's like you are your own tailor. And one other thing too is if there really are stickinesses or differences in terms of the myofascial structure that are causing some of these asymmetries, that is a long time remodeling process. You know, they say 6 to 24 months to remodel a lot of things. If like there's scar tissue or there's just a habit where you've really shortened up, let's say your quadratus lumborum or something else from habit, it takes a long time to remodel that. But movement is key, and consistent movement is key.
Yes.
Right? Continually like moving that in a new way, finding new connections, making those tissues glide over each other that maybe weren't gliding, breaking up any of those little tiny connections between them, and recreating a different fascial pattern is really where asymmetries ultimately change over time. There's strength for sure. Strength is pretty easy to change. Some of those myofascial patterns take a little longer, but they're all done through movement and through maintaining that and through consistency.
And remember, consistency is the key, not perfection.
Absolutely.
You're not going to necessarily get them to be perfect from side to side or even in their movement patterns. One side may always rotate a little further than the other. And you know what? In functionality, it probably doesn't make a bit of difference, those few degrees of motion. However, getting them to move better and getting them to move a little more evenly, even if it's just taking it from a lack of 20% down to a lack of 5%, that's significant in movement. And it can make a huge change in how they feel and their movement patterns in life.
Right. So when you think about that, we really think about like the whole point why we're often going for, or at least why I think I'm going for symmetry, is to balance out the forces through the structure. Right. If I've got a much weaker leg on one side, then I'm not getting equal forces going through my pelvis, through my spine, all the way up through the whole body. And if I can even just bring that strength up a little bit on that weaker side, that can often just ease those forces. So it isn't all ending up in the same spot in the hip or in the knee or in the spine.
Yep.
Right. And I've seen that so often, as have you, Brian, like just a little bit of just moving things a little closer to balance, like, oh, that eases off that stress landing in that same place continually because of that asymmetry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we covered a lot today with asymmetry, and hopefully we've given you a little more to think about and some practical tips that you can actually put to use immediately. And what I love about these conversations is a lot of times just being reminded of them. It's like, you know, all this information. We bought a new refrigerator years ago, and we decided to get one of those with the freezer on the bottom that's sort of like a giant drawer.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You tend to use the top 5 to 10% of the space because it's what's easily accessible. You clean it out once a year and you're like, I forgot I had that. I forgot I had that. And that's kind of how at least my brain feels, is I have all this knowledge from years ago, and these conversations are great because things will pop back into my head and I'll be like, I haven't thought about that recently. I can use that. I can use it on so-and-so, Mr. This. It reignites some of that. So hopefully some of these conversations do that with you. And so you're, you know, inspired to do it with your clients and sort of open up your brain a little bit. Oh yeah, I remember that. Or, you know, I want to try this or I want to try that. So hopefully we gave you some practical things that we can do as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So do us a favor again, like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. You can hit us up, movingcombos@gmail.com, or check us out on Instagram, Moving Combos. We really appreciate it. Like, share, comment, all of those good things. We appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye, guys.